Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I am very, very happy to be able to spend this time with you. Honored to have you here with me. I hope you are all well. And please let me know that I can be heard. If those of you who are here with me live would be kind enough to raise your little blue hands. Javier, Sarah, Bill, Jill, okay, very good. I assume that I can be heard thanks to your feedback. And if you can't hear me, then please let me know. And I'm going to tell you how. Because we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping, as is our usual tradition. You can adjust your audio or viewing settings and options up in the upper right-hand corner. No need to worry about your microphone or video camera, because while you can presumably see as well as hear me, I can neither see nor hear you. But if you want to be heard, type into the Q&A or the chat window, and that will share your question or comment with everyone. And if there's any technical difficulty, then of course, that's a good place to let me know. And hopefully I'll be able to do something about it. Last week, in chapter 15, we covered verses 7 through 11. We spoke about how we are all struggling with the six senses, the sixth of which is the mind, the reservoir of the senses, where all of our senses collect together. We spoke about samsara as a science. That is to say, how one can perceive samsara, how one can see by direct perception how we are changing bodies, and how seeing is believing. In tonight's class, we're going to cover important things to know, more important things to know, and the most important thing to know. We're going to cover verses 12 through 15, and we're going to pay special attention to verse 15, because that is actually a really key verse in the Bhagavad-gita, a cited verse that you should really be super familiar with if you would like to understand the overall point that Krishna is making in his teaching of the Bhagavad-gita. And with that, we will begin with our invocation mantra. And for those of you who are new to the satsang, I'll explain a little bit about the diacritics, the marks that give us cues as to how to pronounce transliterated Sanskrit, such as this mantra. So the dot over the M indicates that we close our lips, and at the same time close the back of our tongue to the back of the roof of our mouth when we make an M sound, as if wrapping our mouth around a little walnut. The bar across a vowel indicates an elongated and open version of the vowel, as opposed to without the bar, in which case the vowel is a little shorter and has a little more closed kind of sound, or a more abrupt sound. And with that, I will chant, and if you like, you can chant back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The translation: I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, the Son of Vasudeva, otherwise known as Krishna, who is the all-pervading transcendence and the speaker of Bhagavad-gita. Where we left off last week, verse 11, endeavoring transcendentalists see the self with a capital S, situated within the self with a lowercase s. Those whose minds have not developed to the point of self-realization, being unaware, cannot see this, though they may try. So the person that the endeavoring transcendentalist sees, that those who have not developed the eyes yet, or the orientation to yoga yet to see, is someone who, according to the Vedic description, looks a little like this. This is the four-armed form of Vishnu, said to be about the size of one's thumb relative to a human being, and situated within the heart of each person, and as indicated by this illustration, within each atomic particle of matter, therefore all-pervading, Vasudev, present everywhere, and therefore knowing everything all the time. We're going to hear more about this expansion of the Supreme Person, known as the Param Atma, or the Super Soul, in just a couple of moments. We're going to look at the central verses to this chapter, and as is our usual habit, I'm going to go through the verses, English translation, then we're going to come back, look at each verse in a little bit more detail. So we begin this evening with verse 12, which translates as, "The splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me." Verse 13, "I enter into each planet, and by my energy they stay in orbit. I become the moon and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables." Verse 14, "I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the four kinds of foodstuffs." And verse 15, "I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas." All right. Let me just move along in our sequence of shared slides. Oh, okay, now we're up to date. So we'll come back to the verse that we will chant together this evening in a little while. First, back to verse number 12. "Once again, the splendor of the sun, which dissipates the darkness of this whole world, comes from me. And the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me." Splendor in general comes from Krishna. Back in the in an earlier chapter, Krishna spoke about how he is the splendidness of all splendid things, and every manifestation of beauty, of power, of whatever fantastic, wonderful feature of reality one may see, that is just a spark of Krishna's splendor. So what Krishna is giving us in these verses are the means by which to see his presence in the material world. The question sometimes arises, how does one see God, or how does one see the Supreme Being, or how do you even know that there is a Supreme Being? And, you know, for myself, after a while, it just became self-evident. It became so obvious that when I looked at the world and I looked at something particularly amazing in nature, and I thought, there's just no way that happens by accident. I have the good fortune of living on the 8th floor of our apartment building, and we overlook some nice trees out front, and we can see a great deal of the sky. And lately, because it's that time of year when birds are in transit, there's a flock of birds that has just sort of camped out here for a little while on their way to wherever they're going. And at certain times of day, they decide that it's time for all of them to take off into the sky and fly around in a group. And they make the most amazing, moving, like kinetic sculpture in the sky. And I'm sure you've seen this, a flock of birds flying around in a group and making amazing patterns as a group. And it's just amazing and beautiful. And, you know, I wonder, are these birds in any way cognizant of their artistry? Because I'm looking at it from one angle and it's amazing and fantastic. And then someone could be looking at it from another angle and seeing a very different perspective on their kinetic artwork. And it looks beautiful in another way. And then I've got the backdrop of the sky. And this morning there were a lot of low ripply clouds, and the sun came up at just that right angle so that it looked like rippling pink fire across the whole sky early this morning. Now, once the sun got up above the clouds, it was just gray. Now, all the same features that were rippling across the sky were there. You just couldn't see it because of the angle of the sun. So I'm seeing this spectacular sunrise, and then these birds flying around. And then in the evening, I get a view of the moon. And I just think, this kind of beauty just doesn't happen all by itself. I'm not convinced that it's pure chance. I'm convinced that this display of beauty in the world has a beautiful source. That is to say, the source of beauty must also have beauty and therefore be even more spectacularly beautiful than all the beauty that I see. There are three elements of epistemology in yoga, of how we know a thing, by direct perception, by logic, and by verbal testimony. Direct perception is not the most trustworthy thing because our senses are imperfect. And logic is good provided that you have the intellectual capacity for thinking logically all the way through something. Verbal testimony means yoga scripture. If we act on the basis of instructions of yoga scripture, that is to say, the scientific process that is given to us in order to recreate the revelatory experience that is being described in a yoga wisdom text, it changes our senses. Our senses become purified. And because it is illuminative knowledge, we can see the logic of a thing that we may not have been able to see before. The idea of Krishna as the supreme person did not seem particularly logical to me the first time I heard it. And at this point, there is nothing more logical to me than the idea that the supreme being or the absolute reality must ultimately be a person, the most beautiful and amazing person. And I can't think of a more beautiful, amazing person than the descriptions of Krishna. So to me, it makes perfect sense. It's completely logical. And then when I look at the world, my own direct perception tells me that it's not a question of whether or not the evidence is there. It's really just a question of whether or not one's vision is oriented or capable of seeing what should be self-evident, which is the presence of the Supreme Person everywhere. So here Krishna is giving us the verbal testimony, how to see Krishna in the material world by association. And because the form of Krishna is the form of the Supreme Person, where beauty is combined with magnificence, then when we see that which is pleasing to the senses, that's Krishna. Also, when we see that which is essential for one's life, that's also Krishna, because he is described as the maintainer of everyone in the Gita and in other corollary scripture. So the splendor of the sun is absolutely necessary in order for us to live here on planet Earth. The splendor of the moon, and as we'll see in the verses coming up, Krishna will speak about the relationship of the moon to vegetation and therefore food. So the moon actually makes vegetation possible, not only possible, but gives the taste to vegetables according to yoga wisdom texts. And the splendor of fire, also an essential element for survival. That is, after all, why cavemen invented fire. If you have any questions or comments on what we're talking about so far, please go ahead and pop them into the chat or into the Q&A if that is somehow or other more convenient to you or your preference. Meanwhile, let's move on to our next verse, 13. Continuing along the same line, Krishna says, I enter into each planet, and by my energy, they stay in orbit. I become the moon, and thereby supply the juice of life to all vegetables. So this is kind of a cool idea. Krishna enters into not only every atom, but enters into each planet as a whole. So not only each atom, atomic particle of every planet, but the planet itself, as well as every living being on any planet. So this is kind of a cool idea. Gravity is also one of Krishna's energies. Hence, everything stays in orbit in, perfect relationship in solar systems and galaxies and such like that. So this is a fun way to remember Krishna, just by noticing that you're not floating up off the earth and out into the sky, because the power of gravity is holding us to the earth, and the power of gravity is Krishna's energy. So just sitting, walking, being cognizant of that which we normally take completely for granted, the force of gravity keeping us on the planet. As soon as we think of that, we can think, well, this is Krishna's energy, therefore I'm experiencing Krishna's presence by virtue of his energy. The Sanskrit phrase of particular interest for me in this verse is rasatmaka, broken up into two, rasa, atmaka. Atmaka supplying, rasa the juice, the flavor, the taste. The rasa is actually a difficult word to give a one-on-one translation for, but it means the taste, somewhere between taste and juice is rasa. So by becoming the moon, so to speak, Krishna is the one that supplies the juice of all vegetation. So all fruits, all vegetables, anything that's juicy. Your juicy, tasty tomato is juicy and tasty by virtue of Krishna's energy as the force coming off the moon that gives such tasty juiciness. Now, I'm not really sure about how Western science puts the moon together with vegetation as opposed to the sun, which we all know you need sun for the whole process of everything growing. In India, certainly, because Vedic culture is present there, then people have this understanding that there's a relationship between vegetation and the moon as much as there is the need for sunshine and rain. So you need all of these things. So keeping along the same theme of what's happening with food, Krishna continues, I am the fire of digestion in the bodies of all living entities, and I join with the air of life, outgoing and incoming, to digest the 4 kinds of foodstuffs. So the 4 kinds of foodstuffs he's referring to are kadva, or food that is chewed, soshva is food that is sucked, leya, or food that is licked, or peya, food that is drank, or something you drink. So nice chewy vegetables or milk products such as paneer or such like that. Soshva, something that is sucked, like a frozen popsicle, or something that you drink through a straw. Leya, that which is licked, like an ice cream cone, or peya, anything that is drunk. That's how Vedic culture characterizes 4 different kinds of foods. And unless someone can tell me otherwise, I think that everything that we consume as food will fall into one of these 4 categories. Meanwhile, according to Ayurveda, which is the sister science of yoga, we understand that we have fire in our systems, and in specifically in our digestive systems, and we rely on this fire to digest our food. One of the reasons that spicy food, hot peppers and such like that, are prominent in the diets of people who live closer to the equator is because the fire inside has to be hotter than the fire outside in order for one's digestion to be good. Not quite so necessary in farther northern or southern parts of the planet. So there's a fire, and keeping that fire going, that fire stoked, just as you would stoke a fire in your fireplace at home to keep your living space warm. Keeping that fire stoked is part of staying healthy. When the fire is really, really hot, that means you're really, really hungry. When the fire is like not so much, you're not particularly hungry. So if your fire of digestion is irregular, or it's tamped out somehow, if you put through too much water on the fire, then some kind of adjustment needs to be made in order to get that fire going again. The point here is that this is also a representative of the Supreme Person. So we heard earlier how when one, Om Agni, yes. We've heard earlier that among the many things one should offer to Vishnu in order to ensure that the activities we engage in are not binding, that is to say that we are not obliged to pick up a karmic reaction by doing so, offering whatever one eats is recommended. And then Krishna gives 4 different categories of food that one can offer: a leaf, fruit, flower, or water. Anything within those categories is offerable. So, food that is simple and keeps the fire of digestion going within these 4 different categories is recommended. But you can't have fire without air. So, air plays a part in digestion as well. In order for the incoming and outgoing air to be like a bellows that feeds the fire, you have to be breathing, and therefore your own breathing, your outgoing breath, your incoming breath, which you also need to live. This is also a way in which one can see Krishna present just by breathing. The deep, deep inhale is inviting Krishna in. The deep, deep exhale is Krishna expelling that air which needs to move out in order for our body to be healthy. The recommendation of the distribution of food, water, and air for a yogic dietary lifestyle is that when we eat, our bellies should be filled with 1/4 of food, 1/4 of water, 1/2 air. And that is the best way to make sure the fire of digestion stays lit and that we take in the nutrition that we need in order to stay healthy, but that we don't overeat. As Krishna explained earlier in the Gita, a yogi should not eat too much or eat too little, sleep too much, sleep too little, moderation in all affairs so that there's really no extreme this or that, which helps one stay equipoised. This also corresponds to an Ayurvedic diet or dietary regimen in that one eats more often, but eats less each time, as opposed to, say, having 3 big meals a day or eating a gigantic dinner after not eating all day. The idea of small amounts of food more often rather than large amounts of food in one swell foop. This is more of a yogic diet. So there is both the practical aspect of how one keeps one's body in an even keel and healthy, keeps therefore one's mind in an even keel, because what we do with our bodies affects our minds. Being equipoised is part of a yogic lifestyle, both physically and mentally. And in each case, having an association with just the basic needs of life that helps us to remember Krishna, who is the ultimate object of meditation. So in these last 3 verses, Krishna has specified some integral functions of living beings that are also manifestations of himself, his own splendor, his own glory. So this is a way that remembrance of the Supreme Person can be very practically associated with just how we live, basic stuff of how you keep it together in the world. Any comments or questions, please pop them into the chat or the Q&A box. And while I anxiously await your questions, we're going to move on to the verse that we will chant together this evening. Now, this verse is a little bit different insofar as the meter is going to change on account of the number of syllables in this verse being different from most of the verses in the Bhagavad-gita. Most of the time, we have been chanting 8-syllable per line verses. And this one is 11 syllables per line, 22 per half of a verse. And so the cadence is going to be a little different. I will chant each line. You can chant each line back if you like. Let me quickly go through some additional diacritics that we see here in this verse, and some other features of transliterated Sanskrit that might not be quite so obvious. For starters, a C in transliterated Sanskrit is always a CH sound that is sounded from the center of your mouth, cha. So it's almost as if the sound comes from underneath your tongue, cha. A dot under an R is also sounded from the same spot, but this time from the center of the roof of your mouth as you curl your tongue back to that spot, as opposed to r. There are two N's that you will see in the last word of the first line, and you're going to hang on both ends. So in Sanskrit, transliterated Sanskrit, we pronounce every letter that we see, so we won't break it up, but there'll be a little extra time on the ends because there's two of them. The same thing with the two T's in the first word of the next line, except with the T, you'll hit the brakes after the first T and then hit the accelerator on the second T. The tilde over an N is a nya sound. That is to say, you take the center part of your tongue and put it to the roof, the center of the roof of your mouth, and then you'll give it a little Y sound, nya. When that N with a tilde appears after a J, the J sound is transformed into sort of a G sound. So instead of jnya, it will be nya or gya, almost like a G sound with a Y after it. An S with an accent mark over it is an SH sound sounded in the back of one's mouth. So instead of a regular SH sound, sh, you get a deeper, kind of a pink noise SH sound as you curl your tongue back towards the back of your mouth. And that, I think, yes, that looks like it takes care of all of our diacritical marks. So I will chant each line, and if you like, you can chant each line back. Here we go. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto. Oops, hold on. I missed one. 2. The dot under the S is a regular SH sound, and a dot under a T means you're going to sound that T from the cliff behind the ridge behind your top teeth, as opposed to bringing your tongue directly to your top teeth, as we normally do in American English. So now that I've taken care of that error of omission, I will chant the first line again, and if you like, you can chant it back. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam kra vedaishcha sarvair aham eva vedyo Vedanta krid veda vid eva chaham. We don't often get to chant 11-syllable lined verses, so I'm going to do it one more time because it's a special occasion, and this is actually a very special verse. So one more time, I chant each line. If you like, you chant it back. Sarvasya chaham hridi sannivishto matta smritir jnanam apohanam kra Vedaischa sarvar aham eva vedyo. Vedanta krid veda vid eva chaham. Translation once again. I am seated in everyone's heart, and from me come remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. By all the Vedas, I am to be known. Indeed, I am the compiler of Vedanta, and I am the knower of the Vedas. So let's take a look at a few of the key words here, and each line one at a time. So to start, sarvasya chaham is actually 3 words, the second word being a compound word combining cha and aham becomes chaham. So sarvasya, of all living beings, cha and aham, I. So this is a validation right out of the gate of the multiplicity of jivas or atmas or living beings as a legitimate feature of reality, which is to say that individuality is not an illusion. A multiplicity of beings is not an illusion, but rather there's all beings, and then there's aham, me, I, Krishna. So there's everyone else and me, is what Krishna is saying here, which confirms once again our existence as a genuine feature of reality. Notice that Krishna has never said anywhere in the Gita that all beings are one or that all beings are me. What he has said is, I am the one in all beings. That's very different. For Krishna to say, I am the one in all beings, is not the same as saying all beings are one, or all beings are actually me. You won't find this anywhere in the Gita. When you hear this about the Gita, what you're hearing is a philosophical overlay. It's not in the text. So if we accept that verbal testimony, or yoga wisdom text, scripture, is a valid source of knowledge, and we, rather than accepting the self-evident meaning of what the text says, overlay some speculative philosophy on top of it, then we're not really accepting the text as a verbal testimony. What we're accepting is the verbal testimony of someone who is reading something into the text that is not there. So that by itself is an important point. Then the next phrase, hridi sannivishto. So hridi, in the heart, hridaya, is the Sanskrit word for heart. And sannivishtaha, situated. So I, aham, am situated in the heart of all living beings, is how we understand this first line. And the cha is actually emphasis. There is cha and me. Everyone else and me, I am in their hearts. So that's how we understand the first line. The second line, mata, from me, or mataha, when it's all by itself, the dot under the H echoing back the vowel that precedes it, if it is, the word is solo or appears at the end of the line. Smritir, smriti means remembrance, that which is remembered. there are two kinds of scripture. And one of them is called smriti, or that which is remembered. Jnanam means knowledge, apohanam, forgetfulness. So we have three things here: remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness. Also, cha, and, coming from mataha, me, Krishna. So one may ask, why forgetfulness? Why would Krishna facilitate forgetfulness? Usually when I forget something, I'm not all that pleased about it, actually. But we're not usually conscious of the things that we're perfectly happy to forget. So, for example, do we really want to remember all of our past lives? Krishna has described that we can take birth in any number of life forms, not necessarily just human life forms. And, you know, who knows what went on even in the human life forms. So do I really want to remember that life when I took birth as an ant and got stepped on by someone, or the birth I took as a hog eating what hogs eat and hanging out in environments that hogs hang out in? You know, I'm betting that not everything I experienced in my past lives was all that pleasant. Krishna could be doing me a favor here. This is a common question when the whole issue of transmigration or reincarnation is brought up. How come you don't remember? Well, the explanation given is that the shock of birth in a new life kind of knocks that out. But here, Krishna is also saying that he facilitates that forgetfulness. A certain amount of forgetfulness is actually healthy and necessary. Not when I like forget to turn the iron off or put my keys in my pocket or something like that. Although, you know, that's also Krishna is taking credit for that here as well. That goes into the category of who can understand these things, although I certainly don't want to blame Krishna for my own incompetence. There's a certain amount of responsibility that goes with that, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. So let's go back to remembrance. Krishna facilitates our remembrance of him. So I gave several examples earlier in the class this evening about how just noticing the effect of gravity can be a trigger for remembering Krishna, because that's one of Krishna's energies. Seeing the moon, seeing, oh, how beautiful the moon is. That can also trigger remembrance of Krishna. Seeing the sun shining in the sky, lighting up the clouds at dawn. Seeing the birds flying in the sky, feeling the effect of the fire of digestion. You know, all these things are ways that we can remember Krishna, but the source of that remembrance is Krishna himself. Therefore, if one understands that the message Krishna is giving here in terms of himself as the ultimate object of meditation and the ultimate goal of all knowledge, then we also remember that Krishna speaks about how as anyone approaches me, I reciprocate with them in precisely that way. So this was an earlier verse from the Bhagavad-gita. And therefore, if we approach Krishna with the desire to always remember him, then that remembrance will be supplied, because, you know, Krishna is reciting the Bhagavad-gita to Arjuna and by extension to us out of affection, out of love. And he is always ready, willing, and able to re-engage in a relationship that we kind of put aside. So a takeaway from this is that if Krishna is the source of remembrance and his advice is always to remember him, then we can approach Krishna with the desire to always remember him, and he will reciprocate with us in precisely that way, by giving us that recollection. So automatically then, we'll be noticing gravity, and immediately we remember, oh, yes, this is Krishna's energy. We see the sun in the sky, and immediately we think, yeah, that's the glory of the sun is actually the glory of Krishna, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the takeaway from remembrance. And then jnanam, or knowledge, well, the Bhagavad-gita is a source of transcendental knowledge spoken directly by Krishna, and we are the fortunate recipients of this information. Whereas forgetfulness of our past lives may come in handy. In fact, forgetfulness of things that went on in this life, also convenient. There are plenty of painful things that I would rather not have my memory burdened with, even in this life, to say nothing of previous lives. The next line. Vedaishcha sarvar aham eva vedyo. So Vedai means, or Vedaish is a grammatical tweak of Vedai, meaning by the Vedas. Cha, also. Sarvai, all. Aham, I, or I am in this case. Eva, certainly. So this puts on some emphasis, like certainly, surely, me alone. So aham eva often means not just me, but only me, exclusively me. And vedyaha, or vedyo in this case, means what is knowable. So this is the line that translates as, by all the Vedas, I am to be known. I am what is knowable by the study of the Vedas. Or to put it another way, I am the ultimate object of knowledge from the study of the Vedas. And then Vedanta Krid. I am the compiler of Vedanta, or the compiler of Vedanta is this particular phrase. Vedavit, the knower of the Vedas. Eva, certainly, again, aham, or cha-aham, and I. So, and I am the compiler of Vedanta and the knower of the Vedas. So this is some pretty far out stuff. And the reason is because, remember, the Vedanta Sutras begin with, now, understand Brahman, the source of everything. Ta Brahma jigyasya janmayasya yataha. So Brahman is understood to be the absolute reality from which absolute reality comes. In other words, the source of reality is reality itself. And knowledge, particularly Vedanta, is also something that comes from Brahman. And Krishna has already established that he is the foundation of Brahman. So what we have here is that Krishna is the source of knowledge, the ultimate object of knowledge, and the supreme knower of knowledge, all in one. So that's a really comprehensive statement about the relationship between Krishna and knowledge, the source of knowledge, the object of knowledge, and the knower. I don't think that leaves anything out. Any questions about this? Go ahead and pop them in the chat. We have time to cover just one more aspect of this. So let's go back to some previous verses where Krishna speaks about the supersoul, the Paramatma. Sometimes Krishna speaks of the Paramatma in the third person. Often he speaks about how he himself is the Paramatma. So I'm just going to read through a series of verses that we've covered in earlier classes and string them all together so that we can hear what Krishna has to say about the Paramatma, kind of all in one swell foop. So here we go. For one who sees me everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor are they ever lost to me. One who is immersed in this experience of unity offers their love to me as the one who abides in all beings. Such a transcendentalist always lives within me, irrespective of any external circumstances. I am the innermost soul of all souls, O conqueror of sleep, seated within the hearts of all living beings. I am the beginning, middle, and end of all beings and all being. There is yet another in this body, the witness, sustainer, and giver of consent, the transcendental enjoyer known as the Supreme Self, who is the highest person. Some see the Supreme Self within themselves by means of meditation, others through the yoga of analytical study, and still others through the yoga of action. One who sees the same Supreme Lord residing within all living beings, who sees the imperishable within the perishable, actually sees. Indeed, one who sees the same Supreme Lord equally present everywhere, does not allow the self to become degraded by the mind. Thus, one approaches the transcendental destination. So those were verses from chapter 6, verses 30, 31, chapter 10, verse 20, chapter 13, verse 23, 25, 28, and 29, depending on how you count your verses in the 13th chapter. But wait. There was another verse back in the 8th chapter, the 6th verse, that also spoke to the issue of remembrance. It goes like this: O son of Kunti, whatever state of being one remembers at the end of one's life is the state of being they will carry into their next life. For one is certain to attain whatever state of being one's mind is absorbed in. So now, this is a little different take on the whole idea of remembrance, because now it seems that we're the ones who are responsible for what we remember at the end of one's life. I was actually speaking to someone at one of my yoga classes just last night about how, you know, with all the impressions on my young mind that television made in the 60s, when I was a kid growing up, I was glued to the TV, and I'm hoping that some dumb theme from some 60s sitcom doesn't pop into my head at the time of death so that I take birth as a Beverly Hillbilly or something. It would be tragic. So whose fault is that? Well, my parents let me watch all this stupid television, I suppose. Anyway, how are we to reconcile this idea of how the consciousness that we cultivate during the course of our lives that we're responsible for will create a memory at the end of one's life that will then take us to our next destination? Well, remember that in verse 23 of the 13th chapter, Krishna characterized himself in his role as the Supersoul as the giver of consent. which is to say that Krishna lets us go wherever we think we want to go. Once again, however we approach Krishna, through his material energy, for example, he'll reciprocate with us in exactly that way. So the state of mind we're absorbed in isn't forced on us. We are free to choose, and Krishna will let us go ahead and make choices, even if those are not the choices he would choose for us, but he does not dictate these things. And that brings us to the end of our class this evening. So the important thing to know is that you can see Krishna in the material world by association with various aspects of material nature. This is actually a reiteration, a very short reiteration of something that Krishna has covered earlier, particularly in the 10th chapter. More important things to know is that Krishna is directly involved in maintaining us in this world in ways that we don't even think about. And when we do think about them and make that association, we realize that we are dependent beings. We are dependent on so many things that are supplied to us as gifts, and those gifts are Krishna's energy. Therefore, yet another opportunity to associate our very existence, our very being alive in this world with Krishna. And then the most important thing to know is that that 15th verse, that Krishna is present in everyone's heart, the source of knowledge, of remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness, the ultimate object of knowledge, the very source of knowledge, and the ultimate knower of everything. So, last call for questions. And while I wait for your questions, I'm going to put a link in the chat for those of you who are here now. And I will put it in the newsletter for all of you who are here later. This is a link to a podcast I was a guest on, DC Yoga Podcast, with my friend Chris Parkinson. We had a very nice discussion about a wide variety of things. So this is the Apple Podcasts link. You can also find it on SoundCloud. I'll include that in the newsletter. So if you're here now, you can also look in the newsletter and see either of these links. Anyway, it was a really fun conversation, and I thought you might be interested in being a fly on the wall for it, so I'm sharing it with you. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, let me tell you what's going to happen next time. If you have any questions, of course, send them to me, Hari@Hari-kirtana.com. And next time, we will continue. Actually, we will finish chapter 15 with the fallible and the infallible, beyond infallibility, and the fulfillment of confidential knowledge. So Krishna will wrap up this chapter on the yoga of the Supreme Person with verses 16 through 20, and with our verses this evening, as well as the verses that we will finish up with next week, we can now understand why this chapter is called the Yoga of the Supreme Person. All right, I see nothing in the question area, and I see a few people who joined us late. Bonnie, nice to see you. And very late, Narayani, you just got here in time for the very, very end. So I trust that you will be looking for the link to the replay tomorrow, since we're now wrapping up. Are you someplace where the time didn't change? Because the time changed this week, and it occurs to me that if you're in Arizona, nothing happened, because Arizonians don't change the time. Or if you're someplace else, since you're just getting here now, I assume that perhaps the switch from daylight savings time to standard time here on the East Coast in the US might have thrown you off. So Narayani, let me know if that's the case, and my apologies for not mentioning that time change in the newsletter for last week, if that's the case. Jess, nice to see you, of course, as always. You're very welcome. I hope you watched last week's class all the way to the end. And everyone else, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your evening, rest of your week, and I look forward to seeing you same place, same time, next time. It is always a great pleasure for me to be here with you. An honor to have you here with me. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a nice night.